there is a chat facility at the bottom, and I'm going to do a Q&A at the end. So I think it will switch over the format, and that means that we'll then be able to talk to each other, or you can use the chat facility at the bottom to ask any questions or have any comments or anything like that. I'm also going to record this session, so that'll record the PowerPoint and it'll record me. And then hopefully, all being well, these sessions can go on YouTube, which means that we can, share them with other people too, so that people that haven't been able to make it today or have missed out don't miss out, I guess, on the chance to talk about some of these important topics. So I'm really, really pleased that you are here. This is the first time I've ever done a webinar, so you must tell me if you can't hear me or you can't see something. Hopefully you can see the presentation, and you can also see me. And today we are talking about the pathologization of women and girls. And this topic, it's really important to me. It was one of the, I guess it was one of those wake-up calls. Sometimes you have those and you've been working and doing something for a long time and you've been doing it a certain way. And you don't realize what you're colluding with, or you don't realize quite what something means until somebody reveals the history of it to you, or somebody challenges you about it, or you notice something, a trend, a pattern. And that's definitely what happened to me. So we'll talk about that as we go along. And, for me, it was that realization that there were completely normal behaviors, trauma responses in women and girls that were quickly being diagnosed as something, a disorder, a mental illness, a behavioural problem, a learning disability. And I guess even when I was running services that had males and females accessing those services, it was so common for me to come across a case of a woman or a girl who had experienced oppression, was living in poverty, or had been subjected to trauma and abuse and things like that, and was very quickly diagnosed with something once she was in that sort of medical system. Very often more than one diagnosis. And so I wanted to talk about this sort of problematization, this pathologization of women and girls, and like where it comes from. And I'm still learning, I'm still reading about these things, and it never really ceases to amaze me quite how bad some of this is. So I've managed to collect some really interesting quotes from history, from different psychologists and doctors, and things like that, about what is wrong with women and girls, basically, and why. So that's what we're going to talk about. But I'm also going to link it to modern day practice, because there's no point really talking about this topic if we're going to try and pretend that this is all in the past, that it's gone now, and that this was a mistake that we made, and then we came to our senses, and then we realised that women and girls aren't mad. And actually, what I think has happened, and what we're going to talk about, is that we've got better at communicating it. We use more palatable language. It's more socially acceptable, some of the things that we say about women and girls, but it's the same stuff. It's the same accusations. It's the same stigmatization of females, but we are doing it in a slightly different way. And we're using more medicalized language that's more acceptable than just saying women are insane or women are hysterical. We might not be saying that anymore, we might not be using those words anymore, but we're definitely still on those lines. So hopefully, if I'm doing this right, this slide will change. Okay, so these are our key questions for today. Do we pathologise normal behaviours and responses? And we're going to get into that in a little bit. What's the historical context of the pathologisation of women and girls? And so I went searching for some, literature and some peer-reviewed studies that looked at language and historical understandings of women's well-being and women's lives. And then I'm going to link this to modern practice, what has this meant for my practice? What has this meant for the type of teaching, lecturing, things that I do now? What am I seeing now that relates to this sort of stuff? So we're going to talk about that too. But before we start, I wanted to just make some things clear. Otherwise, I guess this webinar would come off as biased. And I guess in a way it is, because I'm just coming from these specific approaches. It's not necessarily that that's a bad thing. It's just that I have to be clear that of what my perspective actually is and how I'm grounding this webinar. So the first thing is that it's delivered from a trauma-informed perspective to mental health, meaning that the way I work and the way that I teach is that I would argue that what we see as mental illness or mental health issues, or all the other language that we use around it, are usually responses to something in the social environment or in personal context, and that they are generally a natural, normal, rational reaction to something that is happening or has happened or has been done to that person. And so the trauma-informed perspective really centers trauma as understanding that, a human has been through extreme distress, and therefore their responses and behaviours are probably linked to 1, 2, 10, 100 cumulative traumas that might have happened throughout the lifespan, throughout the childhood, or throughout, or even within a short period of time. So when I teach, I tend to draw on the social model of mental health, which is what I've just explained, and the ecological model. So the ecological model was originally theorized by Bronfenbrenner in the 70s, and it was actually a theory, it was a systems theory of development. The individual does not exist in a silo. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. We don't grow up. We don't exist on our own. We're not on a little island. Everything we do is influenced by the community we live in, the family that we grew up in, the media around us, our religion, our culture, the law, our education system. And therefore, the systems model argued that the individual is situated within a number of other systems that influence them. And I often do use that in mental health and trauma, that it would be, I think it's quite strange of us that we try to individualize trauma and oppression into the individual and say, well, that person isn't coping, that person needs to change their behavior, that person needs to change their understanding of what's happening to them. But we don't say, actually this many millions of people are showing extreme trauma responses because they live in poverty. So let's do something about their living conditions in poverty. We say, well, they need CBT so they can manage those thoughts and beliefs about their poverty, which obviously, so that's my perspective, is that I find that really strange and actually really quite offensive. So that's the first one. And then the webinar also draws on radical feminist approaches to understanding the oppression and categorization of women and girls. So for me, radical feminism is extremely important, and I think that it has a really good handle on the systems that oppress and categorize women in society at lots of different levels of society. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is really drawing on that approach, I guess. And so I will talk about, the ways that violence, male violence, and the oppression of women and the stereotyping of women and gender role socialization has contributed to the pathologization of women and girls. So I see that as really quite central, that we need to understand that the labeling and the diagnosis and the medication, the medicating of women and girls is linked to the oppression of women and girls globally. The fact that, for example, we would go as far as to say, for example, that a menopausal woman is insane. That's important. That's an important link to the way that women are oppressed and perceived within society. That a woman that gets to menopause, who then experiences physiological and psychological changes, those changes are because she's mad, And there's all sorts of interesting things. So we'll talk about that as we go. So I'm just gonna try and flick over to the next slide so we can have a look at that one. So this is interesting. When I was colouring in the woman, I was like, what colour should the woman be? Pink, obviously, definitely pink. And I wanted that to represent, this really strict view that we have of women in our society. I think it's different. We've got to remember that the stereotypes and the labeling and the problems that people see in women and girls are historically and culturally specific. So, in different areas around the world, the way women should look and behave and their roles in the family, the roles in society are different. They generally still fit the same submissive stereotype that I'll talk about in a minute, but they can be different, and I guess some societies more conservative than others, some more individualistic than others, some more sociocentric than others. So there is still quite a lot of variation, but then there's just so many commonalities across it that are important. So the first one is our appearance and body shape. And there's so much wrapped up in that. I'm going to start with something really quite heavy straight away. Is that I was reading the other day about the pathologization of women's genitals, and the way that the media and porn have contributed to this very specific stereotype of what we're all supposed to look like. And the way that the pathologization of women's vulva has really contributed to the rising rates in women and young girls looking for plastic surgery, and correct what they see as corrective surgery on the vulva, and even vaginal tightening. And I was thinking to myself, that's incredible. So we have even created a norm, a stereotype of what a woman's vulva should look like, and what her labia should look like. And then if it doesn't look like that, we should change it because that's a problem if it doesn't look like that. Um, and obviously that's a very specific example, but our appearance is, it always reminds me of what, I'm pretty sure it was Ringrose said it in 2013, said that we constantly walk a tightrope between being sexy and a slut. And what she meant by that was this sort of obsession with women that your appearance is supposed to be, you know, good all the time. You're supposed to be attractive. You're supposed to be well presented. You're supposed to look after your hair and your skin and your body and your weight. You're supposed to dress well. You're supposed to wear certain things at certain ages and stages of your life. You're supposed to have a particular body shape that changes with the eras, which is incredible, really, when you think about it. So, women who have lived 60, 70 years will have seen a number of different body shapes that they were supposed to conform to in each decade and things like that. So, she was sort of saying that you're supposed to be all those things, but not too much, because then you're a slut. So, she's saying you have to be attractive, but not too attractive. You have to be sexy, but not too sexy. You have to show some skin, but not too much skin. Um, and this is this constant battle that women and girls feel. That I always laugh because I think it reminds me of when people say, you can have your legs out but not your tits, or you can have your tits out but not your legs. You can't have both because then you're a slag. And that's, I think that comes from that. It's sort of like, you can show a bit but not too much because then you're asking for it, or it's not too much, otherwise then you're immoral in some way. And I think that this is linked to this. So we have these really strong stereotypes about what we're supposed to look like. And you'll know yourselves that if you book that trend, so for example, if I was to crop my hair and cut it all off and make it really short, um, you know, there's the chance that people would see me as butch, or would see me as, or would assume that I was gay, or would say, oh well, she should have her hair short because she's a radical feminist. She's masculine, and we've got, and even that it is literally just the way that we cut hair, and instantly that pathologizes us as other. We're not the correct woman, because we've got cropped hair, we've cut our hair short and things like that. Um, okay, so the next one is behaviour, and again, this varies hugely depending, I guess, on whereabouts in the world you are, and maybe what religion, what culture, what language, how you've been brought up within your family, political views, things like that. But generally speaking, I've got a quote to show you in a little bit about this, is that we're supposed to be polite, we're supposed to be quiet, we are supposed to be submissive, we are supposed to have, um, quite a demure behaviour. We are not supposed to go out drinking. We're not really supposed to be going out on our own. And I know some of this sounds like I'm exaggerating a bit, but think about what happens when you do go out on your own and people say to you things like, "Oh, I don't think it's very safe for you to be out on your own. Are you not going to go with somebody? You're not going to take anybody with you." And we're still having those conversations with each other. Even women say to each other, "Get home safe. Make sure you get home safe, won't you? Text me when you get in, won't you?" Because we've been socialized that that's a behavior we're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to go somewhere on your own. You're not supposed to walk somewhere on your own. We have all these behaviors we're supposed to, um, conform to. So, for example, I saw something on the internet recently, even thank God it was satire. Took me a few minutes to figure out it was satire because things are just getting pretty wavy for women at the moment. So when I saw it, it was so sexist. I was like, is that satire or not? I can't tell anymore. So it was about that if you work in the workplace with men, that like certain ways that you should behave, or certain ways that you should talk, or certain ways you should approach meetings, so you don't come across bossy, so you don't come across aggressive. And I was reading it. It took me until I was maybe like halfway through it, and I was like, I think this might be satire, but you never really know anymore. So yeah, our behaviours, I guess there's so much there that we're supposed to conform to. And then once you drop out of that, there's a problem. So, for example, if you're extremely confident in yourself, that's a problem. If you are opinionated, that's a problem. If you express anger, that's a problem. And so you can see that stereotypes fit us into the perfect woman box. And once you drop out of that, it's very quickly that you would become pathologized or problematized in some way. Um, Lifestyle, hobbies, like even the fact that you might have a hobby that's not considered womanly or feminine, um, or maybe you love going out with your mates, having a drink, maybe you love racing, maybe you're a massive football fan. It's just sort of not seen as normal, is it? It's just not, because they're masculine things and we're not supposed to do those because we're ladies. Um, so, our lifestyle is all, and that links into the sort of our role in our families. Our lifestyle is supposed to be linked to being a mom and being a wife, which is obviously heteronormative, and it is also positioning us as the nurturing caregiver, like that's our job, is that you grow up and you have a baby. Um, and even though lots of us do that, it's still a very oppressive stereotype. So, you're supposed to stay at home with your kids, and you can get quite a lot of judgment if you decide you want to work and you put your kids in nursery. And you might get people saying to you things like, well, why don't you just wait until they're older and they're in school? Why do you have to work now? Why don't, it's your job to be a mum. You should be there for them. Why are you paying other people to bring your children up? And those questions are never leveled at dads. Nobody says to, the guy at work, why do you put your kids in childcare? Like, why don't you stay at home? Like, why are you paying other people to look after your children? So there's these really specific stereotypes around a woman's lifestyle. All you've got to do is watch an advert on the TV for like gravy, and that will tell you exactly what your lifestyle is supposed to be like. If you model your entire life on a Bisto advert, you will be fine. That's official advice from me. What else is on here? Careers is an interesting one because it's almost as if you can have a job as long as it doesn't contradict any of the other norms that you're supposed to achieve. Um, I was talking to someone recently in academia who said that when she got to the end of her PhD, they'd offered her this great job in a department that she really, really wanted. And the man who was in charge of the department said to her, we'd be really pleased to have you in the department, but I'm just checking that you're not planning on having a baby, like ever. And I was sort of like, he actually said that to your face, and she was like, yeah, yeah. He was dead straight with me, and he said, like, if you're gonna have a baby, we're not interested in you because you're gonna be unreliable, and you're gonna end up taking a lot of time off. You're gonna need mat leave, then you're gonna want flexi working. You're gonna want to be able to pick up the kids from school and stuff like that, and it's just gonna affect your career. So he basically gave her advice and said, don't have children if you think you're going to work for this department because it's just not going to work out. And what was interesting about that was that I was reading that the opposite thing happens when men have children. So men in academia that have babies, now obviously they're not having babies, but their partner's having babies, or they foster, or they adopt, or anything like that. They're sort of seen as more reliable. They're seen as family men. That's seen as a good thing. That's a positive trait. That he has responsibilities, and therefore he would make a good addition to the department because he's a father and things like that. So I found that really interesting, and also I was really quite angry that this woman that I knew had that said to her, especially considering that it was said to her what, a year ago, a year and a half ago. We're at the end of 2018 now. That's pretty concerning that an academic would be sort of taken to one side and said, look, we would really like you to join this department, but not if you're a mom. Um, so it's almost like saying, I value your intelligence and the value that you could bring to this department, but not if you have children, because then you're different, then you're a mum, then you're not an academic, you're a mum first. Um, so we've got, I don't know, we get stereotyped, I guess, as being maybe less reliable, or that we focus too much on our children or something like that. Um, there's a bit there about knowledge and intellect, and it's hard. I guess it's hard for me to even talk about this without me like relating this to myself. And as my practice has developed, I've learned that that's not a bad thing, and that we're often told not to be subjective and that we should be objective all the time, but that's bullshit basically. There's no way of being objective when you're talking about things like this, especially as a woman. And knowledge and intellect is definitely something that is part of the stereotype, and it reminds me, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's Harry Enfield and Chum's sketch about what happens when women go to university. And I still love watching it because it's ridiculous, but it's also not. Like, it's one of those things where you're like thinking, oh my God, this is so funny. But at the same time, you're like, that is definitely how really intelligent women are seen, like, as just a problem. That you overthink things, that you're too critical, you're too aggressive, you have too many opinions, you've got too much to say for yourself, and you should just shut up and sit down. Um, and I watched it recently. I shared it on my Facebook again, that video of the sketch. And there's a bit at the end where I'm not sure, I can't remember the actress's name. It's not Kathy Burke, it's the other woman that does the sketches with them. And at the end, they do the sketch twice. Once where she's very intelligent and she asks questions about politics, and all the men around the table are absolutely disturbed by her. And then they rerun the sketch again, and she listens to them all talk about politics, and then she says, "Don't you just love fluffy puppies?" And all the men go, "Oh, she's so lovely, isn't she? And and she just says something ridiculous about how beautiful, cute newborn bunnies are, or something like that. And it's just such a good sketch. I might actually start using it in training. Um, and it really does show that sort of it's exaggerated in a way, but it kind of isn't. That if you are intelligent and if you've got something about you as a woman, you are problematic. You're not supposed to. And we'll talk about that in a little bit because that is actually one of the reasons that you would be medicated and put in an asylum a couple of hundred years ago would have been intellect. Um, Same with opinions and feelings. We've already started touching on this because of the sketch. Thanks, Harry Enfield. Is is about, if you've got opinions, if you've got a political opinion, if you have an opinion on a social issue, if you have opinions in your personal life, um, even if I don't know, you just have an opinion generally in a public space. It's it is perceived differently. Oh, opinions at work, I would say as well. So if you're in the workplace and you sort of pipe up and say, "Oh, actually, I don't think we should do that," or "I have a better idea," or "Have we thought about this?" It's interesting how quickly a woman would be seen as disruptive or problematic, whereas a man would be seen as dynamic and innovative. So our opinions and then our feelings, which we're going to talk quite a bit about as we go on, because women's emotions have been pathologized for a long time, and we're still definitely doing that in practice, especially I would say with adolescent girls and young women. And then again with pre and postmenopausal women and women going through the menopause, where your emotions are seen as a problem. They generally are um, exaggerated, that you are overly emotional or you're oversensitive or you're hysterical. Um, and so that is definitely linking into the way that we are working with women and girls in practice at the moment, in my experience. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then our likes and dislikes. Now, this is really broad, but even saying that you like a particular thing that's out of the stereotype of the ideal woman in society would be problematic. And the same with dislikes. So, if a woman says, "Oh, I hate rom-coms," or "I don't like receiving flowers," or I don't know, I don't like feminine things, or I hate wearing dresses, or that things like that, where it's subtle, but it's almost like a why? What's wrong with you? You are you deliberately trying to avoid femininity? Is there something wrong with you? Why don't you like that sort of thing? Um, so does, I guess what I'm saying in this slide is that our lives as women are controlled by some really incredibly ingrained stereotypes. When you start to move outside of those stereotypes, you have a problem. Um, and what I mean by you have a problem is not that you actually do have a problem. It's that you're gonna come across some people that think you do have a problem, and then um, depending on how authoritative those people are and how convincing those people are, and also how powerful those people are, you are potentially going to be medicated, diagnosed with something, convinced that you have something wrong with you, convinced that you're in the wrong, convinced that you should stay quiet, convinced that you are aggressive, that you don't know what you're talking about, um, talked down to, belittled. Um, and all of us will have been through something like that, where the second you open your mouth, or you look different, or you behave differently, you are suddenly seen as other. You're a problem. You're not a real woman, or you are fighting against femininity. You are not conforming to the gender role stereotype. You're too masculine. You're too aggressive. Things like that. And so it's really interesting to see that the personality traits in a bloke that would be seen as positive are generally seen as negative in a woman. So I'm just going to show you two examples before we move on about medical model versus social model of mental health. Hopefully you can see this. I'm wary that it's maybe a bit small. Maybe I can zoom in on it. Let's see what I can do. Oh, I can. Okay. There we go. So this is essentially a medical approach to Amy. Amy is mentally ill due to psychological abnormality or a brain chemistry imbalance. So, in our very widely accepted medical model of mental health that's used in the NHS, it's used in CAMS, it's used generally pretty much, it's very widespread. It comes from psychiatry, and the approach is that people who are mentally ill um, and that's why for years and years and years, and still in America, there is an entire section of psychology called abnormal psychology. Is that you're abnormal in some way? You might they assume that you have something wrong with your personality. You have emotional regulation issues. You have thought processing issues, distortions, beliefs, values, responses, and things like that. Or the very sort of neuro way of looking at it, a physiological way of looking at it is the mental illness or distress or what I would call trauma or distress is actually caused by a brain chemistry imbalance, and that can be corrected with medication, um, and which I find exceptionally interesting. As I was talking about this the other day, I was teaching in Stockport, and I was talking to somebody about this, and I was saying it's really interesting to see the way that the medical model has tried to convince the public that mental health issues are the same as physical health issues, that having, let's say, for example, depression is the same as having a broken leg. And actually, I don't think it is. For example, imagine you went to the doctors because you thought you had diabetes and you were having symptoms of diabetes, and you thought, I'm going to go to the doctor and just check if I'm okay. I'm having all these weird symptoms, and I know that they can do this blood test and they can check the levels in my blood and they can probably tell me if I'm okay or not. So you go to the doctor has a standardized test. They can test for what is wrong physically. So, for example, they refer you, you have a blood test, and the blood test comes back and says your sugar's super high or your sugar is super low, and they're really concerned about that. They might go, can you come back again and do a fasting test so we can have a look at how your levels change when you've not ate? They then might say to you, okay, we think it's normal, we think you're okay. It's within normal ranges. We know this because we've done 1,000 peer-reviewed studies, and we know generally what looks like normal blood sugar and what doesn't. Or they might say, actually, this came out really high, and we're very concerned that you have this type of diabetes. So, because you have this level and it happens at this time, and because when you fasted, this happened, we're now going to medicate you with this amount of milligram of this. You must take it at this time, and this is how it's going to metabolize in your body, and this is how it's going to help you. Now, that is a medical model a way of looking at a health issue. Now, if you then look at mental health issues, there is a version of that. There isn't a standardized way of measuring any of it. So, for example, if I went to the doctors and said, um, feeling really down, I think I've got some symptoms of what I think is depression. I've looked at it on the internet and I've got these symptoms. I'm feeling really low, and also this, and also this, and also this. There is no way of that GP knowing whether you do actually have depression or not. So, especially from a brain chemistry imbalance approach. So, they would then usually do the, like, for example, Beck's inventory or another quick psychometric, usually 10 to 15 questions. Um, and then based on your answers of how you feel, they would medicate you with something that does alter the brain chemistry, on the basis that, like, for example, with SSRIs, which are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that they could block the receptors in the brain and then serotonin would then build up in the brain, and serotonin is said to give positive feelings and increase positive well-being and things like that. But there is no way of knowing whether you actually do have a brain chemistry imbalance, is there? Because they can't blood test you. They're not going to cut your brain open and have a check. They're not going to MRI you for depression. They are not going to test brain chemistry. They are like, how do they know? Also, how do they know how much you would need? How do they know when it's gone? How do they know when you're better? How do they know if it's working? And so a lot of this is assumption. So in this particular model that we've got in front of us now, Amy lives in a refuge and she's in poverty. So she's on minimum benefits. She drinks when she's stressed. She has flashbacks to child abuse. She has trouble sleeping because of nightmares. She is struggling to trust new people. She has very short relationships that tend to break down very quickly. She has issues with self-image, so she puts a lot of weight on and she eats a lot, and then she will crash diet and drop loads and loads of weight, go really, really thin, and then will eventually put that weight back on. And she's been yo-yo dieting for years, and she has casual sex with men. Now, the reason I've picked those things is because all of those symptoms would be enough for Amy to be diagnosed with a psychiatric issue in the UK and in the US. So in this particular example, she might be told that she has some sort of personality disorder, bipolar, attachment issues, attachment disorders, behavioural issues, all sorts of things going on here that she could potentially be diagnosed with. And so on this slide, you can see that it's only slightly moved. I've not changed anything in the circles around. But actually the social model of mental health, which you can see there, would be that all of those things are still happening, but Amy is impacted by her experiences and context, and she's responding to trauma or distress. So, for example, she lives in a refuge. That's stressful. Humans, they're not supposed to live in a refuge. It's a very stressful environment. So that's gonna up the distress levels, trauma levels. She's in poverty. She's struggling to feed herself. She's struggling to be able to get around. She's got no transport. She's got nowhere safe to live. In terms of like Maslow's hierarchy, straight off, just in that circle, we've got some problems, haven't we? She drinks when she's stressed. So to me, from trauma-informed approach, I would see that as a coping mechanism, potentially. Although obviously it'd be worth just talking to her. Like, what does the drink mean? Why does she do it when she's stressed? Is it an escapism thing? Is it a disinhibitor? Is it none of those things? We don't know, do we? So these are assumptions. She has flashbacks to child abuse. So that would suggest to me that she's still trying to process trauma, or she's trying to avoid it, which is why the flashbacks break through. She's having trouble sleeping because of night terrors, nightmares. Again, links to trauma, really strong links to trauma in the research. Struggles to trust new people. I'm going to get into that in a little bit, so I'm not going to go into massive detail here. But rather than us seeing this as an attachment disorder, that actually, and I'm going to argue this in a little bit, should probably just be seen as normal at that point. For a woman who has been through abuse and cumulative trauma, not trusting new people is actually an adaptive coping mechanism and should be seen as normal, not only normal but positive for a period amount of time, for a good period of time, because it makes total sense. So I'll talk to you about that in a minute because I'm going to give you a case study. Short relationships, same thing. If she's struggling to trust new people, she gets into relationships and then they don't really last. But she's been through multiple traumas from child abuse. So rather than us seeing that as some sort of issue coming from borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder, that actually is linked to the trust thing, that is linked to the trauma. So a social model of mental health would be saying, what are all of the issues that are contributing to these behaviours, contributing to these feelings that Amy has? Yo-yo dieting, I've put that one in there because lots of people who've experienced traumas and been subjected to abuse and violence have issues with body image issues, have issues with their weight, have issues with the way their body looks. They also are receiving the same messages as everyone else about what their body's supposed to look like as a female as well. So yo-yo dieting, really common. Having casual sex with men, I've put in there because there's such an issue around women's sexuality and sexual liberation that quite a lot of so-called mental health issues, but also other issues, like in social care measurements and assessments, will have something in there about promiscuity or about sleeping with people or being sexually liberated. So my research in the PhD that has just gone in found the same thing. It was that when I described women as being sexually independent or sexually liberated or enjoying sex or having sex with multiple people, the general public sample that I surveyed had real issues with that. They were much more likely to blame her for anything that happened to her. If she was raped, if she was attacked, if she was assaulted, if she was being sexually harassed at work. If I described that woman as enjoying sex in any way, even in a really subtle way, people would pick up on it really quickly. Women and men would blame her a lot more. So you can see, hopefully if I flick them, you can see nothing has changed. They're just two different perspectives of looking at Amy. So she is either ill, and we pathologise her and we medicate her and we tell her all of these problems around you, yes, they are problems, but actually it's about you and the way you're responding to this, and it's you that needs to change because you're not processing this properly and you have some sort of problem in your brain. And so that's that individualization of social issues. So rather than us seeing all of these social issues as contributing to what Amy is experiencing, we're actually seeing Amy as the problem. Amy is the cause and the solution to her own distress. Whereas in this version here, we're saying actually all of these bubbles here are contributing to and causing Amy's distress. And so unless we find a way of reducing or removing these bubbles, Amy's not going to feel any better. Amy's still going to be stuck in the same place because all of these things are impacting her in some way. Maybe not this one, because she could just do that because she enjoys it. And it's us with the problem, the observer, the third party, the professionals. So we are going to move on and have a look at the history of this utter mess we are in. And so I'm going to zoom out so you can see these properly. I wanted to show you this. So this is the history of pathologization of women and girls from 1700s onwards. And so the word hysteria is actually Latin for womb. And that was because most of the mental health issues, or what was seen as mental health issues, as you'll see in a minute, were not mental health issues. But anyway, it was seen as coming from the womb. So the reason females were seen as mad, insane, or hysterical was because it was intrinsically linked to us having a womb. And so you can see here that Laycock, a doctor, argued in 1840, hysteria is the woman's natural state. So we are naturally problematic, naturally hysterical, because it's linked to our female form, it's linked to our female biology. The reason that we have these problems, that we have this, what they call the woman's disease, was just because of what we are, because we're females and we're problems. It was linked to our femininity and our gender roles and our hormones and our female bodies. So I just wanted to show you that. The quotes don't get any better, by the way. There isn't like a timeline of this getting better. Just a warning. And this one's from 1885. A hysterical girl is a vampire who sucks the blood of the healthy people around her. That's nice, isn't it? So this is a discussion in 1885 around younger girls, adolescent girls. And isn't it interesting? So if we just switch for a minute into like linguistics, a hysterical girl is a vampire. So she's being described as a monster. She's a dead vampire bat monster thing, and she sucks the blood of healthy people around her. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this is because I really want you to think about this quote. Think about the way that teenage girls and young women, especially, I'm thinking like in social care and policing, are seen as like impacting everyone else around them. You know, like if they self-harm, or if they go missing, or if they're traumatized, if they're distressed, or if they're diagnosed with mental health issues, they're seen as like impacting everybody else. To the point where I was talking to a professional the other day that was saying that their participation projects with young girls have basically dried up because there is a fear that if you put these traumatized girls together, they'll just impact everyone, they'll impact each other, they'll affect each other, it'll spread. And I've heard that before. The first time I heard it was about 2013. I was really sad to hear it last week. No, not last week, this week. because I thought, wow, we're still in a position where we're not gonna let girls who've been through similar traumas to like be close to each other and to talk to each other and support each other in a participation project because they're basically gonna affect each other. They're gonna make healthy. So they were saying, well, what if one girl is like more traumatized than another, and then she affects everyone else in the group. And that's this quote that's saying that the hysterical girl is a vampire who sucks the blood of the healthy people around her. Now, that would also link possibly to the way that families would sometimes get two doctors to sign a girl or a woman off in their family and have them sectioned and put in an asylum. So it would take two doctors to agree that the woman was mad or insane or hysterical, and families would sometimes approach them on purpose and say, you know, we need two signatures. And then you could lock them away, get rid of them because they're problematic and they're affecting people's perception of our family and stuff like that. But I was really taken by this quote. This quote is important because I think we are. I think we're still seeing girls and women, if they're perceived as having some sort of problem or they've been traumatized, as affecting everyone else, which means that we don't even really care how it's affecting them. What we're thinking is like, how does this affect everyone else? She's bringing everyone else down, or she's a danger. And I'll come on to that in a little bit because what we have found is that over the years, like for example in the 1700s and the 1800s, and early 1900s, we would see these women as like problematic and mad and insane, but in a very feminine way. Now, with borderline personality disorder, bipolar, things like that, we actually see women as dangerous and the girls as dangerous. Um, so I'll come on to that in a minute because well, I hope I don't forget to talk about that because I want to talk to you about that in a bit. Okay. I wanted to show you this amazing list because it's ridiculous, but also because I wanted to just make it absolutely clear that you've probably seen this on the internet and thought it was a meme. It's actually real. Even Snopes was like sort of confirmed that it was real and checked it out. And so um, it was from the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane. It was 1899 that this was released, but it was actually the reasons that women were admitted to the asylum between 1864 and 1899. You can see there. Now, if we just like sort of skip through them a little bit, you've got ill treatment by husband. Now, I guess the reason that that really interested me was because we still kind of do that, don't we? You know, like women who've been subjected to domestic violence and then have mental health issues or trauma responses, and then we see them, and then we say to them, "Oh, you've got personality disorder, or you've got bipolar, or you're depressed, or you've got anxiety disorder." But actually, they've just been abused by their husbands for years, sometimes decades. And then we tell that woman, you are mentally ill. That's why you respond like this. And it's so interesting to see this was at the top of this list in 1899. It was like, and it didn't even, it doesn't even like beat around the bush. It literally says ill treatment by her husband. That was the reason she was put in an asylum because her husband had beaten her or raped her or abused her. And there's just like no irony there at all. It's like they literally wrote that on the admittal form. So what else is here? Imaginary female troubles. Now I'm going to get onto this in a little bit because we are definitely still in a place where we think women just make up physical health issues. And I can definitely say from personal experience that I've been to the doctor with something quite minor, like physical issue, and I've been told it's in my head, like without even examining me. Oh, it's because you're stressed. I was like, I hope that one day I don't die of something, and some idiot has said to me, "Oh, it's just stress." One of them, I'm trying to think of one recently that's not like too personal. So like most people know that I had my cervix removed after I went for my first ever smear when I was 25. Went for my first smear, as a campaigner and someone that signed all the petitions, I was like really pleased to get my first smear letter at 25. Went straight for it. Was really glad finally that at 25 I was worthy of having a smear. Um, it was like it's like a prize for not dying before 25. So I I went for it. Never thought anything of it because I've never had any symptoms or anything like that. And then I didn't even get a letter. I got a phone call saying um, the results have come back and we've booked you in for an operation in 8 days. Um, I was absolutely blown away by that. I actually thought I was like dreaming or something for at least the first few days. Anyway, went in, had the operation, blah blah blah, cervix removed. Had to wait 6 months to see whether it had spread. Didn't spread. Didn't need chemo. Didn't need radio. Didn't need a hysterectomy. Um, have no cervix. I have no idea how cervical screening is going to work from now on. I've got no idea what they're actually going to do. But anyway, so recently, because I'm sort of quite vigilant now, I'd been having like pain in like the side of one of my breasts, and I thought I'm gonna go and just get someone to like just check it for me. I also had a breast cancer scare about 2 3 years ago where they found a really large hard lump, and then they told me it was benign, it's fine. So I thought, yeah, I'm definitely gonna go. This was quite recent, probably 3 4 months ago. Um, and it was a female doctor went in and I says, I'm just having this really strange pain in the side of my breast, and I've never felt it before. And also, like, I think the lymph nodes in my armpit are up. She didn't even examine me at first. She was just like, yeah, I don't think it'd be anything. Are you worried about anything at the moment? Is anything stressing you out? And I was just a bit like, what? Like, are you not even gonna like check that what I've said? And I was actually quite challenging with her, and I said, no, I am asking you to examine me because I'm not a doctor and you are, and I want you to just feel what I can feel and just check whether I'm okay. Well, how old are you? 28. It's very unlikely to be anything. I was like, I'm not asking that. I'm asking you to check just in case there is something that I need to be referred for. Um, and anyway, she checked. This is a very, very long story, but basically she was wrong. She told me that it was my bra cutting into my tissue. I knew it wasn't because I have my bras fitted. And I said to her, I don't think it is that. I think it's something else, and I don't think you're right. And she basically told me it was stress. And then she said to me, "What job do you do?" And I thought, oh God, here we go. And I said, I'm a psychologist, and she's like, oh, do you work full time? And I said, yeah. Well, it could just be stress. And I was like, why would stress do that? Like, I understand psychosomatic issues, but I really think that I'm being ignored right now. Um, and Anyway, I knew she was wrong. It played on my mind for a few days, and the next port of call, who is incredible, is my physio. I went to him and I was like, "Look, I've got this weird pain, and I want you to check it as well before I basically pay privately for this scan because it would freak me out this much that I was in this much pain." Um, he did an examination and said that I had two ribs under my breast that had been immobilized for some reason. He thinks I might have slept funny or something else, and it had caused really severe pain to radiate into my armpit and under my breast. He worked on it twice and it went away and it never came back. I knew there was something wrong, but I was being told it was in my head. That's not the first time that's happened to me. Lots of women get told this, and that's why this imaginary female troubles thing on this list really interested me, because it was sort of saying, you're making this up, like these female troubles that you have, they're in your head. I can't tell you how many times I've been told that over the years. I had a similar issue with chest pains that I had for 8 years, that I never ever got to the bottom of until I went to my physio. He has told me I've got this issue with my ribs where the cartilage gets immobilized and then it causes very severe pain. It mimics a heart attack, but it's not. It's all to do with the way that my rib cage and the muscles in my chest work. 9 years I was told I was mad. I was told I was making it up. This chest pain that like it was I was just stressed. It was my physio that said to me, no, you actually, I also was found to have disc damage in my spine, which causes the problems I have in my back and my chest. I was just told that I was mad. I was told to get counselling and all sorts of things. When I told my physio was really angry um, because he was like, your symptoms are very, very clearly linked to your spine and the chest. So, yeah, these imaginary female troubles. I can see what you're saying, Jackie. I'm just reading it. Turns out you have pneumonia. I don't know what it is with them. It's like you're a woman and therefore you're hysterical, and that's why this is important. This topic's important because we're still battling against this. Like you are exaggerating this. You're oversensitive. You know, that sort of thing. Anyway, what else is here that we can start saying that we've all done? Immoral life. Immoral life was generally used against women to mean that she was basically not conforming to gender roles. If she went out on her own, if she drank, if she didn't, she left her husband, you know, if she wasn't a very good mom, anything like that, really. Um, Overtaxing mental powers was linked to at the bottom studying, you know, this sort of like using your female brain too much and it's not working now because you've overused it and you should just be thinking about cute puppies. So there were a number of women who were put into the asylums because they thought too much and they were using their mental powers too much. And that was linked to the studying thing. If women were very interested in a particular topic, um, they could be pathologized as being problematic because they study too much, they read too much. You can see at the top there, novel readings there as well. Menstrually deranged. I'm going to come back to that actually because we still have some issues at the moment with what's being called, I'm going to get this right, premenstrual dysphoria disorder. Which is being used against women at the moment and girls to argue that essentially they develop some sort of mental health issue around the time of their period or during menopause. Usually, though, it's about around the time of menstruation. But and then there's other things that women of menopausal age will get diagnosed with. Um, and so at this time, it was women who, I don't know, for example, experienced very low mood because of hormone changes or became very anxious or angry or, you know, frustrated, whatever it is around their time of the period, bloated, didn't eat as much or ate lots more or became tearful. The things that we now understand are due to huge hormone surges and then huge hormone drops between estrogen and progesterone. They were seen as deranged at the time. Political excitement and religious enthusiasm. Basically, that is linked to the opinion thing. If you have a belief or an opinion as a woman, you are a problem. Dropsy cracked me up. And actually, whilst you're here, I'm just gonna Google it for like a double triple check that that's definitely what that word means, and I'm not going mad. What the hell is fish dropsy? Why would that come up as the first thing on Google? Dropsy. I'm just going to check 100% that this like that's not a fish disorder. Oh, do you know what? I remember it is an old term for the swelling of soft tissues due to the accumulation of excess water. So it's edema, isn't it? Is what I'm thinking. You know, there's loads of times in your life that you could get that, couldn't you? I got it when I was pregnant with kids. Like, bloody legs were swollen with water because I had high blood pressure and I've got like a minor sort of heart issue. Um, that's interesting. So you could be put into a mental asylum for having edema. Can you imagine? So you have water retention problems and therefore you are insane. Welcome to being a woman. So what else is here? Masturbation. Still have issues with this. This is so taboo even now. So fair enough, you might not be sectioned or be told you have a mental health issue, but this is definitely taboo. This is definitely something a woman should not do, or should never speak about, or should never admit doing. Otherwise, you orange. It's a man thing, masturbation. Not fulfilling wifely duties um, is obviously linked to, patriarchal views that a woman in a relationship is supposed to do what a man says and fulfill um, her husband, and if she doesn't do that, then she must be insane, right? So we'll put her in the asylum. And I guess, whilst I'm talking, you're probably thinking some of these things are still affecting women and girls now. Some of these things are still, we're still pathologizing women and girls for the same things that we're talking about here, even though we're sort of maybe reflecting on them and thinking, gosh, doesn't this sound stupid? As we've just talked about this imaginary female troubles thing, you would be hard pushed to find a woman who has been to a GP and not been told at some point that it's in her head, that whatever, she's making it up, she's over exaggerating it, must be stress, it must be depression, it must be anxiety, rather than, for example, referring you for a blood test that you needed, or I don't know, referring you for a scan or something like that. Interestingly, I just thought of another example. I've recently found out, because I'm allergic to caffeine. I shouldn't really tell people on the internet this, because what if someone's trying to kill me? I don't know. Might give me some coffee or something. I don't know. Or put some caffeine in my food. So I've just found out that the other one that I'm having some issues with is olive oil and olives. And I've been having some very serious reactions to them. So I went to the doctor and I said, I would like a full allergy test because I am worried that I'm developing more and more allergies. And I would like, an expert sort of test. And the doctor just looked at me and was like, do you have this symptom? Do you have this symptom? I was like, no, I don't have any other symptoms. It's just those two things. Um, and then he very quickly started saying, well, are you in a period of stress at the moment? And I was like, what? I've been allergic to caffeine since I was like 17 years old. I was like, what has this got to do with anything? And then I was saying to him, I have tested this. I've gone through all the different foods that I thought it was. It's definitely olive oil. Um, I was like, why would stress why would my stress be linked to olive oil? That makes no sense. And he was having none of it. Anyway, he's not referred me for the tests. He won't refer me for the allergy tests. So at the moment, I'm having to cut out anything cooked in olive oil, anything with olives in it. I already know the caffeine one because I had a very, very bad reaction to caffeine years ago, and then I've known ever since. And then someone accidentally gave me a paracetamol with caffeine and I had a seizure. So we already know that one. I don't give a shit what they think, whether they think I'm mad or not. I'm not having caffeine in my diet. And then the other one, obviously, now is olives and olive oil. But they will not refer me for the test because they think I'm making it up. So that's nice. I'll probably just have to pay privately, which is very annoying because none of us should have to pay privately for these things. So, yes, history of pathologization of women and girls, 1864 to 1899, also 2018. So then I wanted to show you this one, and this is a quote from 1987, not that long ago. It says, women suffering from the nervous disorder, which was characterized as a form of nervous exhaustion, were described as having a refined and unselfish nature, and as being just the kind of woman one likes to meet. Now, the reason that I found this particular quote so interesting was that what we're essentially saying here is that women who are extremely submissive and anxious and scared of everything and are, it says they're refined and unselfish because they're suffering from nervous exhaustion. The male author then goes on to say that that's just the kind of woman you would like to meet, is a woman like that, is a woman who is scared, submissive, quiet, anxious, timid, polite. And I just thought, wow, like that's incredible, really, that he would go that far in an academic text to say that. And I have a really strong view that like sometimes people say to you things like, "Oh, well, we shouldn't really listen to that because it was ages ago, so it doesn't count." 1987 ain't that long ago. You can't just discount things because they happened like 20, 30, 40 years ago. That you can't just say that view in society has just disappeared now because it's not 1987. And so it is interesting that at the same time these women he's talking about were being pathologized, they were also, because that pathologization makes them look more feminine or appear more feminine or conforming with the feminine gender stereotype, they're then seen as a nice woman because she's timid and she's quiet and she's scared and she doesn't have no opinion. She doesn't talk, she doesn't say anything. She doesn't run a mouth or anything. So she's just the kind of woman you want to meet, right? Um, and then I started looking at the history of treatment. And, some of the treatments were terrifying. Some of the treatments are torture. I use that word and I mean it. We're talking about mass womb extractions of women. And that's because, as I said earlier, the word hysteria means womb in Latin. So a lot of the original theories of women's trauma and distress was based on the theory that it's caused by the womb. And if you get the womb out, then she won't be mad anymore. She won't be insane anymore. Um, which is absolutely horrific. It's the same with sterilisation, although I must say, we've still got issues in parts of the world, developed parts of the world, like Australia at the moment, and I think Australia is a good example actually, is that certain Indigenous women are being sterilised, and it's twofold, partly because they're problematic and partly because this is about stopping the next generation. It's about killing off a group of people. And so mass womb extraction is obviously extremely dangerous. Back then you're likely to become infected and die from them, but even now we are sterilised, and we have done for a long time, sterilised black South Asian Indigenous women, so that they cannot reproduce. And so obviously that is horrific. The other thing that's really important is that medical experiments in psychiatry were often tested on Black and Asian women, generally Black African women, in terms of, and we also tested, believe it or not, cesarean sections on Black women. So doctors that were practicing and were theorising that you could actually get a baby out without vaginal birth would test it on Black women, thousands of which died, obviously, and the babies died a lot of the time while they were practicing, and theorising how you could actually cut a woman open to get a baby out. And this was all around the same time. So women's wombs and reproductive abilities were central to some of this. Um, Frontal lobotomies, people call them frontal lobotomies, but the original term was a leucotomy, were often used on women, especially if they were problematic. Interestingly, what I've not put here, and I've just remembered it, is ECT. And we don't talk about electroconvulsive therapy that much anymore because we kind of assume we don't do that. And I got well and truly schooled about 2012, 2000, yeah, about 2012, 2013, when I met a teenage girl who was being given frequent ECT after she was abused as a child. She's from the Midlands, and and then I met loads of others after that. And then I realised it's a myth that we don't use ECT. It's just a myth. It was being done on the NHS. This particular adolescent girl that I met was having ECT, I think she said every 6 to 12 weeks, something like that. She'd had a number of rounds of it. And I was always under the impression that we didn't do that because we knew that if you carried on doing it, it was damaging. And ECT like conjures up, I don't know, like images of like um one of flew cook flew over the cuckoo's nest and things like that. Like that this was years ago and that we don't do that anymore. We definitely are doing that. And actually we've seen a recent trend in ECT that it's come back. It's been seen as really popular. It's being used in children with autism and ADHD at the moment in the US. Saying that like very strong amounts of ECT can give relief to autistic symptoms, which is absolutely terrifying. I was watching a documentary on it recently. Um, we're still doing the medication and sedation stuff. We know now, for example, that a lot of very commonly used antidepressants now have sedatives mixed in with them. They didn't used to. They used to be pure SSRIs or MAOIs and things like that. But we now know that they're mixed with SEDs. So they change, for example, serotonin release or serotonin reuptake, but they also sedate women. And interestingly, that is the bit that people generally get addicted to. It's the SED, because sedatives are highly addictive. Whereas SSRIs, even though they are addictive, they're not as addictive without the SED. So it's been more and more common that we now add sedatives into antidepressants. So and often patients are not told that. They're not told that the things that they're put on contain quite a strong sedative, and that's why they get that feeling of calm, or they say that they're very tired, or that it's changed their sleeping patterns and things like that. It was because they're taking sedatives every day, and they're not necessarily told that. Isolation and imprisonment. So we know that women were locked away, they were admitted to asylums, sent away from the family, or outcast by the family. So we talked earlier about seeking two signatures, for example, to get your female family member locked away. And then right at the bottom, I've put the more religious stuff, which is, women being said to be witches, or being said that they were possessed by spirits and demons, that they needed, what's the word I'm looking for? Exorcism is the word I'm looking for. That they needed to be exorcised, that they needed, religious leaders to come and release them from demons that were causing them to act in these particular ways that we've talked about. So we have a very, very long history in the way that we treat women. So before we finish, I wanted to talk to you about some real examples that I have come across personally. I'm just going to zoom in a bit because it's a little bit small. So this is a shortened version of Dina's story. Obviously, I have changed the names, but it's in the Little Orange Book, which is a book me and Claire wrote that came out a few months back. There's a sort of a larger version of this particular case study, and then we spend maybe like 4 or 5 pages picking it apart. Dina was, so it says, repeatedly abused by her parents, treated her in a loving manner. Now this is really important because that was ignored really when she was diagnosed as having attachment disorder and personality disorder. So Dina had been through all of this. Her parents were selling her, trafficking her across the UK. And her parents would always tell her that she was a good girl and buy her gifts and tell her she was doing a good job and that sort of thing. And over a period of time, as she got older, she learned that people who are nice to her, you can't trust them because they always want something out of you. They're lying to you. People who are nice to you are not really that nice. That's what she learned from her parents and from the men who raped her. Eventually safeguarded, placed in care. She was extremely fearful of new people, didn't trust anyone, refused to engage with new workers and anyone who tried to build a relationship with her. And I remember talking to those professionals who said to me, it's impossible to get her to trust you. It is impossible. And that she's scared of new people. She assumes that everybody's lying to her and things like that. I was like, well, yes, she does. That's right. Now, I had got there a little bit too late, otherwise I definitely would have influenced it as much as I could, but she was then diagnosed as having an attachment disorder and a personality disorder because she wouldn't build the relationships with the workers at this residential that she'd been put in. And I was trying to say to them, she is logical. She's behaving right now in a rational way because all of the adults in her life have lied to her, have built a relationship with her and then exploited her. So she is protecting herself from this happening to her again. That's what she's trying to do. So the fact that we are then pathologizing her as having a disorder, having not only an attachment disorder and a personality disorder, we're saying to Dina, all of that stuff that's happened to you and what you've learned about life might well have happened to you, but you need to forget it now and you need to trust us because we're nice, we're safe. That's not going to work. And actually, it's good. I would argue that Dina being very wary of new people is a good thing. That's a positive thing. It means that Dina is very aware that people aren't what they seem, and that some people can be nice to you because they want something out of you. Now, so that's important, that she has recognised that at some point. She is then applying that to everybody. And we don't like that because as professionals, that makes our job harder. But actually, that's a positive thing. So we need to accept that Dina's not ready to build relationships with us yet. And we need to just get over ourselves at this point. We need to give her space and time. And we need to accept this is going to take a long time and that she is going to be very wary of us at all times until we've proven ourselves to her. And that, to me, is a good thing. I would argue that she does not have an attachment disorder and also definitely does not have a personality disorder. And the fact that she doesn't want to build relationships with people at the moment is definitely related to what she's been taught about adults so far. This one is Sarah, and I met Sarah when she was a second year university student. And we were walking somewhere once, and she was telling me about the stuff that had happened to her as a kid. And then she was sort of complaining that she'd had, relationships with guys, never really works out, doesn't last very long. She told me that she struggles to maintain relationships, which I thought was really interesting because I have a real interest in language. She told me that she never really trusted the guys. She would like them, she would really, really like them, but she couldn't stay in a relationship with them. And she didn't feel like the relationships were any good for her, and then she'd end them. And then eventually she went to seek help about this and was sort of blamed, as you can see there. She was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and told that that was the reason she couldn't hold down a relationship, which is why she was then telling me, you can see here, she struggles to maintain relationships with men. And she's told here she can't hold down a relationship. So what professionals had essentially told Sarah was that this was her fault. So she has a personality disorder that means now that she can't hold down a relationship. And she told me, so this was an example of a woman who had totally accepted that diagnosis. And she told me that her personality was to blame for all the bad breakups, for all the ways that men had treated her, and that she had to learn to be better. And that she said that she was on that process, she was on that journey of learning about herself and being better in relationships. And that's not the first time I've heard that. She told me that her personality disorder caused her to be difficult and caused her to wreck relationships, was the way she saw it. And I thought that was really sad. That really upset me because that professional did a real number on her, and rather than supporting her, had convinced her that this was her problem, it was in her. And then the last one is Ellen. And Ellen was abused and raped through early childhood. She was often locked in very small places by her mum. And she had an imaginary friend. She had a magic imaginary friend who would look after her and would support her and tell her that she's going to be okay and that she was a good girl and that someone loved her and things like that. Now you can tell here, if we just talk about it right objectively, you can tell here what's happening. She has no love from her mum, no affection. She has nobody telling her she's a good girl. She has no idea whether she's going to be okay or not. And the brain's extremely powerful. And so there's so much that we don't know about the brain. We don't, this could be a coping mechanism. It could be a way that the brain reacts to stress. As she got older, imaginary friend became extremely important to her. It was a coping mechanism essentially for all of the distress. She didn't tell anyone until she was much, much older, when she was an adult. And the imaginary friend eventually developed into a voice in her head. So she would say, "Oh, I hear voices. I've got a voice in my head." I would talk to her all the time. When she did disclose to a professional, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, medicated, and then spent a long time unemployed and struggling because everybody thought she was mad, is the easiest way of putting it, is that she's schizophrenic, she can't be trusted, we can't employ her, she can't volunteer for us, she can't do this, she can't do that, she's not reliable, she hears voices, she's dangerous, because there's a stereotype of people that hear voices as being dangerous, that they're going to like kill people or jump off a bridge or that sort of thing. So I think this one's really sad because there's so much that we don't know about voices, hearing voices. I'm working on a resource at the moment with Rachel Marchant, whose PhD is in this. It comes out in June. It's going to be free. And it's about working with young people and adults who tell you that they hear voices, and the way that we can work with that without pathologizing it as a psychosis. Um, the other thing that's really interesting, I was talking about this the other day, and I find this really interests me, is that most people hear voices. Most people hear voices. A lot of us have a constant voice, like a stream of talk all the bloody time. Now, the reason I became interested in that is because I'm one of those people. So I have this narrator in my head that I can't get rid of. I can't shut it up. And I've never been able to shut it up. It just never shuts up. It's like me in my head, but all the time. Um, as I'm falling asleep, I tried meditation, and like it just never shuts up. The voice never shuts up. I could be like literally sit there trying to meditate, trying to like what they call like clearing your mind. I can't clear my mind. I like the voice in my head going, "This is stupid. Why are you even doing this? Never work." And all my voice will be going, "You have to be silent, silent. You have to be silent now. It's supposed to be silent now. Is this silence? Have I achieved silence yet? Oh no, I'm still talking in my head. Oh God, why won't this won't work? Why? And actually, there was a study that found recently that I think it's between 47 and 56% of the public have a constant voice in their head that talks to them all the time from like a different perspective. So not just your own thoughts, but like something that talks to you and has a conversation with you all the time. Um, Now that suggests to me that that's quite common, and therefore this coping mechanism that Ellen has here probably very common actually. So telling herself, because this isn't an imaginary friend, obviously, it is her voice in her head saying, "You're going to be okay. You're a good girl. You know, you're not a bad girl." It was looking after us. It was looking after. So therefore, she was looking after herself. But we pathologized that, told her she's schizophrenic, medicated her, and we've affected her life chances at this point. So I guess to summarize, we've got this sort of stereotype of difficult women and girls. So you can be difficult. So women and girls should be ideally polite, nice, happy, content, quiet, have no opinions, have no ambitions, live to serve others. And difficult women are frequently diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Um, and so research is now showing that the diagnostic criteria from DSM-2 for hysteria is almost exactly the same as the diagnostic criteria from DSM-5 for borderline personality disorder, which means that even though our language has got more palatable and we're calling it something clever, like borderline personality disorder, we're actually just talking about hysteria. That's what we're talking about. Hysteria has been described as the wastebasket of mental health. And that was a long time ago, probably I think it was early 1900s. Borderline personality disorder is described as a catch-all diagnosis, and it's really interesting that we have these similarities between hysteria and borderline personality disorder. And then we have angry women and girls. And so I've taken a quote here. The typical borderline patient has been described as demanding, angry, aggressive woman who is labelled as mentally disordered for behaving in a way that's perfectly acceptable in a man. And so any women who are very assertive, you're going to be perceived as aggressive or angry anyway because of sexism. But the borderline woman, who's borderline personality disorder is a true catch-all diagnosis. There's quite a lot to argue that the majority of us would be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder at one point in our life or another. But the argument being that these behaviours would probably be acceptable in a guy and he wouldn't get a diagnosis. Researchers found that men's sadness and anger was considered to be related to situational factors, such as having a bad day or going through something, whereas sad and angry women were judged as too judgmental from a study in 2009 with the general public and with professionals. Meaning, this is really interesting to me because this is about attribution actually. So we're talking about that professionals and the public attribute men's emotions to the social model, but we attribute women's emotions to the medical model. So we're saying when men struggle, we're saying, oh, it's the situation he's in. Look at all these horrible things that have happened to him. Look at he's living in a refuge. He's really poor. He's struggling. Blah blah blah. But with women, we're saying she's just too emotional. She overreacts to everything. She exaggerates everything. She's making it up. So that again, I found very interesting. Okay, what else have we got before we finish and we can have a chat? If you've got headphones, you can plug them in, and then when I switch over the format, we can have a bit of a chat, or you can, if you don't have headphones or you don't have a mic on whatever you're using, or you are sat here and you're in an office or something and you're like, yeah, not gonna start having this conversation out loud, you can always use a chat function at the bottom. Yeah, I agree with you, Jackie. I think that it is really interesting the connection between borderline personality disorder and hysteria. Um, it's incredible in terms of just even the fact that DSM-2, the list of the criteria to be hysterical is so similar to the list of criteria to be borderline personality disorder. That suggests that the values of us around women and girls never actually shifted, but our language got more intelligent, which I've seen as well in victim blaming. Whereas we used to just say, oh, well, she's a slut, she asked for it. Now we say things like, well, she should take more responsibility for her actions and her own personal safety. So we're not calling her a slut anymore. We're just saying that she's reckless or she led them on or she was asking for it. But we're very careful with the language these days because we've learned how to say horrible shit about women and girls, but not sound like that's what we're doing. So therefore, like where are we now? Is sort of where I'm going to finish. In CSE practice, still highly likely to remove girls, take them away from the family, and lock them somewhere. And even though we don't like looking at it like that and we don't like talking about it like that, that is what we're doing. Now, it is different. We've got to say it is different if the abuse is in the familial home. So if we're saying the kids are at serious risk because mum or dad is abusing them every day, they're being beaten, they're being neglected, they're being abused, then removing them and putting them into foster care or putting them with another family member is obviously something that we need to consider very quickly because the harm, the perpetrator, is in their house. But in CSE practice, that is very, very rare because majority of cases of CSE, the perpetrator is an external person raping or abusing girls, and the families themselves are not harmful or dangerous. But we're still highly likely to remove the girls from their families, place them into care, or what we call therapeutic provisions, which generally are not therapeutic at all whatsoever, and no one in that therapeutic provision has any therapeutic training whatsoever. There's often not even a counsellor in there, or a therapist of any sort. So we are still likely to do that whole thing where we lock away traumatized girls and we say, well, we need to move them away from their family and we need to put them somewhere else so they don't affect other people. Girls and women are 7 times more likely to be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder than boys and men showing the same symptoms. So research has shown that women and girls have on a ratio of 7 to 1 will be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, even when boys and men are showing the same trauma symptoms. So we've got to see that this pathologization of women and girls is actually extremely prevalent because 7 times more likely is a problem. Girls and women more likely to be medicated with antidepressants, sedatives, or antipsychotics. I'm still working with professionals all over the country who are telling me that you can't get particular services for women and girls who've been sexually exploited or raped unless you will accept a psychiatric diagnosis for them. So professionals working in residential care, professionals working in social care are saying, oh, we really need access to therapy for these girls that we're working with. But CAMS are saying that unless they have this diagnosis, they can't access the funding for therapy. So we're sort of giving girls and women a psychiatric diagnosis that they can't get out of. It's very hard to remove a psychiatric diagnosis from a file and to get that just annulled or taken off. And so we are stuck in a way. I'm hearing from a lot of professionals they feel stuck because some professionals don't want the girls that they're working with to have a psychiatric diagnosis, but they know that if they don't get a psychiatric diagnosis, they can't get access to particular provisions, which means that we are forcing girls and women to accept psychiatric diagnoses that they don't actually have so that we can access funding, which means we're failing at that point. And we need to look at why our funding is being it's almost like gatekeeping until they have a psychiatric diagnosis that we can't get off afterwards. And then the last one is girls and women who have mental health issues or disabilities are the least likely to get justice for rape, abuse, or violent crimes. And what I'm talking now is criminal justice system, where women and girls that are known to have some sort of psychiatric diagnosis, mental health issues, or a learning disability, or other disability, or autism, are seen as unreliable, bad witnesses, bad victims, non-credible. So they're very unlikely to ever get justice for anything that's happened to them because they're just not seen as the ideal victim at all. What are you saying? Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that is slightly different, having your own tenancy, semi-supported model. I guess the issue would be more like, how do they end up there in the first place? Is it because they've been ousted? Is it because, like, people have gone, oh God, we can't work with her anymore. She just needs shoving over there. There's nothing more we can do. She needs to be put in a displacement, that she's the problem. Um, Yes, potentially feeding into the locking them away thing, I guess. You're right. If they have pissed off every other service that they've engaged in, you will be seen as a last option. Resi's often seen as a last option, even like children's care homes are seen as a last option. Um, and partially that's because it's a symptom of a society that doesn't know what to do with offenders. It doesn't know what to do with oppression. It is not ready to tackle sexual violence, abuse, domestic violence, racism. It is sexism. It isn't ready to do any of those things. So actually, we individualize the problem within the woman and the girl, and we move them instead, and we get them to go somewhere else and rebuild their life rather than us dealing with the situation, because the situation, the ecological factors, are way harder to deal with than convincing a woman or a girl that she needs to go somewhere else and she needs to sort her life out and she needs to, deal with her emotions better. But we can talk about it. You're always welcome to just talk to me about stuff like that anyway, because in some ways you're stuck in a system, um, and partially it will be about language and the way your service is designed, the way the service is described, the way that you take referrals or reject referrals, the way that other people perceive you, as well. Even though sometimes that's not your fault, it can be that res is just seen as like a last resort, I say. The other thing that's interesting is anger. Um, and I see a lot of professionals scared of anger in women and girls. They see it as a real problem. You need to like get them on anger management courses, stop them showing any anger, stop them from expressing anger. And actually, I believe that people have mixed up anger and aggression. So women and girls should be allowed to express serious anger after oppression, after trauma, after abuse. We shouldn't discourage anger. We should like let anger out. Anger is not a bad emotion. We have just pathologized it as a bad emotion. Anger is extremely important. It's an evolved emotion. It's used to keep ourselves safe. It is used to fight things off. It's extremely important that we express anger when we need to express it, but that's not conforming with the gender role stereotype. So we try to convince women and girls that anger is a bad thing. You're not supposed to get angry or frustrated or show anger at any point. Um, and so I get professionals saying to me things like, yeah, but you can't have these girls throwing chairs about. It's like, I was not talking about throwing chairs. If you're working with a woman who throws chairs at you, that's completely different. Like, that's dangerous. That's violence. That's actually, if you've got anger here, then you've got aggression, then you've got violence. That's where you're at there, where you're getting a chair thrown at you. I'm talking about the way that we convince women and girls that anger is bad, that they shouldn't be angry, or that holding on to anger is bad. You shouldn't hold on to your anger. You should forgive and forget. Like, oh, fuck off. Like it's horrible that sort of that we put on them that you are bad because you're still angry that you were sexually exploited. Yes, of course they are. Or we say things like, you can't be angry forever. You need to stop holding on to it. Why? Why can't she be angry forever? Why? Because we've convinced ourselves that it's bad. That's why. Um, Women and girls still seen as emotionally manipulative, promiscuous, asking for it. I'm not going to go into massive detail with this because that's very self-explanatory, and I would be very surprised if you didn't know what I meant by that. But the emotionally manipulative one is important because emotional manipulation features in both hysteria and borderline personality disorder and bipolar. That women sort of use emotions to manipulate professionals, partners, things like that. Women and girls are rarely believed when they disclose rape, abuse, and assault. Now, that I think is probably linked to that stuff around imagined female troubles, the sort of, you are problematic if you disclose these things because you're probably making it up, actually, or you've probably exaggerated it, or you don't know your own mind, or you misread somebody's intentions and that's your fault. Um, Self-harm has a reputation in girls as being attention seeking. So, for example, when we work with boys and men who are self-harming, we instantly think, oh my God, suicide. I think, oh, there could be something very serious that happened here. Why is he self-harming? Women and girls, especially adolescent girls, I'm still coming across professionals that tell me that they do that for attention. They're doing it because, what's the word? Um, well, they say it's attention seeking, but it's something else. I think a cry for help. I hear that a lot. It's a cry for help. Because then it might not be a cry for help. Self-harm is very complicated. It has lots of different meanings for lots of different people. You can't just assume that teenage girls are harming themselves because they want you to notice them. That's a very egotistical way of looking at their self-harm. Might be nothing to do with you, believe it or not. Um, yes, that has issues, around pathologizing, is that rather than us seeing that woman or that girl as needing support, we are pathologizing her as like she's emotionally manipulating us by self-harming. She wants our attention. Women and girls are less likely to have physical medical conditions and pain taken seriously or medicated in hospitals and A&E departments. Now, this is a finding from 2008 study that looked at the way that women and men are treated when they go into A&E in serious pain. So, for example, cardiac pain, chest pains, stomach pains, head pains. And they looked at what happens when a woman comes in and says, "Oh my God, I'm in severe pain, like I really need help," and what happens when a man comes in and says the exact same things. And they observed these A&E departments over a period of time and found that women would be left over 4 hours longer than a man without painkillers, would be perceived as making it up or exaggerating it, whereas a man who is in a lot of pain and telling you that he's in a lot of pain would be considered very seriously ill very quickly. He would be given painkillers much quicker. And that's, when you think about that, that's about gender role norms. So it's saying that a woman is hypersensitive, she probably doesn't really have that much pain, blah, blah, blah. Whereas when a man does it, if he's coming in here upset, telling us he's in pain, he must be in pain because he's a man, and strong men don't be in pain. That is terrible grammar. But that, you know what I mean? It's like, if this man's here telling me he's in awful pain, he's crying, telling me that it hurts, he must be very serious. If a woman's here crying, telling me she's in terrible pain, there's a good chance she's probably exaggerating and there's probably not that much up with her. So we'll see. We'll wait. And that's what they found. They found that in hospitals and A&E departments, we're much more likely to do a watch and wait with women's pain. With men's pain, we don't do that. If you're interested in that paper, I will send it to you. I've got it because it just completely, I just found that so interesting. Also terrifying, that I thought, God, can you imagine if one of us was in hospital and we were having like chest pains, cardiac pains, or a hemorrhage, and people were just like, doctors were sort of going, yeah, she'll just leave her a couple more hours, see whether she calms down a bit. That terrified me. And then I realised the more I would protest, the more I would probably be seen as mad. And then it reminded me of a study, um, which, oh no, hang on a minute, it's here. 1 second. Sorry, I'm just like surrounded by books. I'm going to try and get it out and not drop it everywhere. I think it's that one. Got that? Richard Bentl's work, Madness Explained. It's not that one. I can tell that it's not because it's not got all my corners bent over, and I'm horrible for that. It must be one of Richard's other books. So I've got a few of Richard's books. I think so. It's in that book that he tells us about this study that was done, this like social experiment, where activists decided to pretend that they were insane to get admitted to an asylum. Once they were inside, they then told them that it was a social experiment. You know, some of them were in there for like 47 days, couldn't get out. Because the more you tell someone that you're not mad, the madder you are. And that's what it was seen as. It was seen as um, a delusion that they were a social activist. So they were getting in there to like do some research, like what's it like in there? Do you get treated good? Do you get bloody ECT? Do you get painkillers? What happens to you? And then once they were in there and they'd done the research, they were then saying to the medical staff, I am actually a researcher. I faked my way in here using the criteria, and I've been observing all of your patients. And they were actually being diagnosed as being delusional because you can't be not mad once you're in there. The more you say you're not mad, the more mad you are. And that's what it reminded me of, was that like, if I was to go in knowing this research about A&E departments and say, well, actually, I think that you are ignoring me because I'm female and you are not taking my pain seriously and blah, 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 there is a good chance that they'd probably be like, and pathologise me further. I'm just catching up on your comments. Yeah, you're right, Jackie. I'm just reading. Yeah, you're right. Well, that's because it's about protecting the staff member, isn't it? It's not about protecting the person. And yeah, absolutely. Both we had some other participants that have been in and out all the way through. If anybody wants copies of bits of research that I've got, you're always welcome to have it. It's if I've got it, you can have it. It's all PDF free stuff. So yeah, you're right. And I noticed Sarah's put that she agrees with the anger versus aggression stuff. I just, yeah, I just think we should do as much as we can to allow people to express anger. I think pathologizing it is really quite dangerous, actually. Um, this lovely slide, is our final bit before we have a chat. If you fancy a chat, if you want to stick around for one. Same shit, different era. So I've got a quote here that says, "As the outspoken, difficult woman of the 16th century was castigated as a witch, the same woman in the 19th century is a hysteric. In the late 20th and 21st century, she's described as borderline or as having the premenstrual dysphoria disorder." And you can see there that as we've talked about the links between hysteria and borderline personality disorder, there's also there a specific disorder that's now becoming more common in the 21st century, which is definitely linked to the womb. It's premenstrual dysphoria disorder. We're basically talking about the same stuff. We've gone round in a massive 400-year circle. And we're now going back to diagnosing women and girls with a disorder of menstruation. We've gone around in a massive circle. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Maybe not enjoyed it. Oh, well, I enjoy it because it's still an interesting topic. We're allowed to say we enjoyed it, even though it's horrible. So there are other webinars that I'm doing. I just think it's really useful to be able to just talk like this and not have to come and find training or spend a fortune. And so I've got the psychology of victim blaming sexual violence, where I'll talk through the psychological theories of why we blame in sexual violence. That's in January. Victim blaming in child sexual exploitation practice is very specific to all of the ways, all the procedures and the policies and everything that push us to blame the children who are being sexually exploited instead of blaming the perpetrators. And then I am open to suggestions of topics. Don't go too wild though, please. I'm trying to do one webinar a month, keep them cheap. And if anybody has any ideas, then you're always welcome to ask whether I'll cover something. You can always check back and tell people that all they need to do to book on is go to victimfocus.org.uk, go on events and webinars, and then they can just pick whatever they are interested in. I'm hoping this has worked quite well. This is our first one. So hopefully it's been easy to use so far, and that I think you've been doing okay with the chat thing, which seems to have worked quite well. So I am going to test now whether I can switch your audio on so we can talk. So let's see. Okay, now I should probably have researched this a little bit more, but that means now that you can ask a question and we can talk, I think. Or maybe I can do it so we're just like everybody can talk. Let's do it like this as a discussion. You are now in the meeting mode, blah, 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 go back, yep. So this, I think, means now that we can just all talk. So do either of you have headphones? So if you don't, then that's okay. If you want to ask a question in the chat, then we can, if there's anything in particular you want to say. If not, if you want to just let me know in the chat that you don't have any questions or comments, and then I will close this session and then I'll stop recording. In fact, actually, I might just stop recording now because it's been recorded for websites and YouTube, and then we'll just be able to talk away from the recording, so we can go through some stuff. Yeah, I can see it. I'm just gonna have a look at it. So I'll turn the recording off. So thanks very much for listening. There's some information there about tweeting me, emailing me, website, resources, all sorts of resources at victimfocus-resources.com that you can get hold of, and you can pre-order because they're coming out in June, but you can get them on pre-order cheap now. Okay, right, I'm going to turn the recording off.